Hello, all. This is the reading mini lesson that was supposed to, or not mini lesson, sorry, reading whole group lesson that was supposed to take place today, but only 4 of you decided to show up. So, in those 4, I greatly appreciate you. The rest of you, we have to do better. We have to do better. We have to show up. I know that it's a different type of learning, but it is still a school day, so you have to show up. Unless your parents get a hold of me and say, my child cannot attend the whole group lesson at this time, I need you to be here, okay? So what we're talking about today is realistic fiction. And we talked about character traits yesterday, but I kind of want to take a step back and I want to examine the book or the story, the text for this week, From Out of My Mind is what it was called. And it's about the girl in a wheelchair, kind of confined to a wheelchair, and she can only use her thumbs to speak by pressing or by pointing to specific words and stringing sentences together that way. But we found out, based on some character traits that we looked at yesterday in a lesson, that she's a lot more intelligent than, her outward appearance may have us think that maybe her brain doesn't work right. But it gave us some inner monologue, some thoughts, and it really showed her traits. So today I'm going to make a realistic fiction anchor chart. Realistic fiction. Now, this may seem like an oxymoron, saying realistic fiction, because what is fiction? Fiction is a fake story, right? If you're reading a piece of fiction, you're reading something that isn't real, it's made up. My favorite fiction books are fantasy. I enjoy fantasy fiction books. That's the genre I like. But this genre, and that word genre means what type of fiction, or what category does it fall under? And the text Out of My Mind comes from the realistic fiction genre. What is realistic fiction, though? Well, it's realistic fiction is it's a work that's set in a place, in a time, in an area. It's something that could happen. It's realistic. It's not this girl in the wheelchair gets a magical wand that lets her walk and talk. It's not dragons. It's not flying cars. It's grounded in the real world. Okay? It's something that could happen. I mean, I've heard stories of people in wheelchairs that only have those functions. There was a guy named Stephen Hawking, who we were going to watch a video of today. There's a guy named Stephen Hawking. He was considered one of the smartest dudes in the world. He was confined to a wheelchair. He had to talk through a computer. But he was that smart that he was able to even, think about physics and discuss theoretical physics through, he had to move. He could only talk through the computer, and he had to make himself do it he could only have minimal movement. It's like his face, he could twitch. So anyway, realistic fiction. That's the genre we're talking about. And I'm just going to lay out some of the aspects of realistic fiction. Now, we should have our My View book, because it has this anchor chart in there with some of these things on it, but we don't have those, and hopefully we're getting them soon. But since we don't have them, I'm making this anchor chart so we can all just kind of look back on it and say, oh, okay, that's what realistic fiction is. So first, realistic fiction. What is the purpose of realistic fiction? And the purpose of realistic fiction is to entertain or tell a story. entertain, tell a story. Like any good piece of fiction, it's there to entertain or tell us a story. But what are the elements of it? What makes it up? Well, it's the same elements of any good piece of fiction. And let me color this in. It's the same elements of any good piece of fiction. There are certain things that you'll come across that are in every kind of story, just told in a different way. The elements are the setting. And we had talked about setting, I think it was a little bit before break, but setting, where the story takes place, right? I'm trying to find our anchor charts. Where and when a story takes place. So think about that, the Out of My Mind, the excerpt from Out of My Mind. Where does it take place? Well, I think that there could be some arguments that it takes place in the girl's head. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. But there's also the setting where she is with her teacher, Mrs. V, right? Then we have characters. So the characters are, and think about this, who? Who are the characters? Who's in the story? How do you think they act in a realistic fiction? In a realistic fiction text? Are they jumping over cars? Are they fighting ninjas? Are they, masters of the universe? No. They're normal people, right? They behave like real people. Behave like you or I. They behave like real people. And they often change over the course of the story. Excuse me. They might learn a lesson. They might start off a jerk, and maybe they end up being nice by the end. There's also the plot of a realistic fiction story, but what makes up the plot of a realistic fiction story? It's events that could take place in real life, and we discussed that, right? Events that could happen, I'll say. So it's not Godzilla coming to Tokyo and razing it to the ground. It's, a girl in a wheelchair and her struggles. And then finally, this last element, something that I'm just going to touch on the word here. There will be many more lessons coming up where we really think about this, but as for right now, I just want to say theme. And theme is the message of a story. Okay? Theme is a lesson learned from a story. And it's a message, we're going to say a message about an important topic. A message about something important. So it's something that you really have to think about, because it doesn't just come out and say, be kind. The theme is a message about something important, but you have to figure it out. You have to use your inference. You have to use your thinking voice to really think about what the theme of a story, like a realistic fiction, might be. Okay? So that's it for realistic fiction. Its purpose is to entertain, tell us a story. It's made up of the same elements of any good story, really, but the setting, where and when the story takes place, and I'm going to say, and I should probably add to that and say, it seems real. Semicolon. Seems real. It's not on Mars. It's not in Hyrule. It's not in San Andreas. It's not in the Marvel Universe. Though maybe some of the Marvel, you can argue maybe some of the Marvel Universe seems real, but they're still superheroes in the Marvel Universe, right? And then the characters, the who of the story, but they behave like real people. They behave like you and I do. Okay? And they change over the course of the story. And that means, like I said, maybe they start off as a jerk. But by the end, they've had an experience that they go, oh, that's not a way to act. And then the plot. The plot is the story, right? What happens to a character. But the plot in a realistic fiction is something that could happen. Okay? Something that there's a chance that maybe it could happen. And then the theme. Remember, theme, it's an interesting concept. It's something that we'll really sit down and look at as we go on with reading for the rest of the year. But right now, I'm just going to tell you it's a message. It's a message about something important to the story. Okay? All right, so this is just part one of what I wanted to talk about today, but like I said, only a few of you showed up, 4 of you. So I had to record these because I wanted to get it out to everybody. And it is what it is. This is the first part. There's going to be a part 2 where I further examine character traits and looking up character traits and how to find those character traits and how the character reacts to their traits, how their traits cause them to act, that sort of thing. So pay attention to part 2 coming up here as well, guys.
Hello, everybody. This is the second part to our mini lesson from today. The first part was me going over an anchor chart about what a realistic fiction text is. And one of the key components or key elements of realistic fiction is the character. And the character is somebody in realistic fiction that behaves like real people, and they change over the course of the story. So why I'm pointing out the element of character is because we are talking about character traits. And remember in yesterday's lesson I said character traits are tried and true. That means that character traits are, a part of who you are at all times. And we talked about the girl from Out of My Mind, and we talked about looking at her words. So the character, she said, learned over and over. And we said that she was studious and intelligent. And character's thoughts, she was stringing together a funny sentence. So she's playful and she's funny. So what the big takeaway I want you to remember is what a trait is. And just remember that it's a part of who you are. It's not a feeling. Because remember, feelings are fleeting. They come and go. You're sad one minute, you can be happy again. You're lonely, maybe you get a friend, you're not lonely anymore. You're bored, you find something to do, you have cured your boredom. But your traits are a part of who you always are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a couple more traits here in our list that we looked at yesterday. We looked at the word cunning, and we looked at conceited. And I want to take a second to look at a couple more. And the first one, I was looking at a list of words that I wanted to go over with you guys, and I wanted to go over assertive. Has anybody ever heard that word before? Assertive. He's a very assertive person. An assertive person is being assertive is being able to stand up for your own or maybe even other people's rights in a calm and a positive way without being an aggressive, without being an angry person, or just sitting there and accepting something that you might consider wrong, just sitting back and taking it, being passive. Assertive is somebody who's able to get your point across without upsetting others or even without becoming upset yourself. So if I'm assertive, I'm able to stand up for myself without upsetting everybody. I'm able to tell you something without upsetting you or even getting upset myself. It's a very good trait. And the synonym for assertive, there's a couple of them that I'd like to point out, but somebody confident. And someone maybe who's bold. If you're bold, you stand up for what's right. If you're confident, you have the confidence to walk into a room and assert yourself. So we need to think about examples of somebody or character from literature that you might be familiar with, someone that's assertive in literature you're familiar with. The first person that comes to my mind is, I'm thinking of, remember in Freak the Mighty. Do you remember Kevin, aka Freak? He was an assertive person. He did kind of upset people, but he had no problem asserting himself. He was confident. He was bold, right? What about Joe in our current read aloud, the first rule of punk? He's kind of a confident dude, right? He's always there to make sure everybody's all right, and he knows how to calm a situation down. He's always calm himself. So assertive, that's one word that I wanted to look at, one trait word I wanted to look at today. And then the other one is a word I really enjoy. Now I think it's a funny trait in a good character, but it's the word pompous. Have you ever heard the word pompous before? Well, it is somebody that feels somebody that is self-important. Somebody that is somebody that's conceited, but it's even more so than conceited. They have an inflated ego. They're arrogant. Self-important is the word I'll use here. Kind of like conceited, but pompous is like, oh, I'm the best. How dare you speak to me? And think about funny characters. Usually they're buffoons in any literature. I'm trying to think of a pompous character. It's kind of a buffoon, something you might know. I would say Iron Man is pompous. He's arrogant. He thinks he knows what's right all the time. And he really just, he's a self-important jerk. Okay, so those are the character trait vocabulary I wanted to go over with you guys today. Just assertive and pompous. So if somebody has the trait of being assertive, they're kind of confident. They can walk in, they can take charge, and they can assert themselves they're not rude. It's not being rude, it's being confident. And pompous is just kind of a self-important turd. Okay, so to get going on with traits, remember character traits are important because you can see how a character's actions are affected by how they react in situations. And their traits affect the outcome of a story. They affect how the story goes. So a character's words and a character's thoughts are the two most important ways for this unit that we're going to look at determining character traits. I'm actually going to copy this and post it onto a new blank because I want to. So remember, characters' words and characters' thoughts. And we're really focused in on characters' thoughts for this lesson because the main character of the text we're looking at is somebody that speaks in her mind. And she would say all this stuff out loud if she could, but unfortunately she's only capable of speaking by pointing at words. So we're going to look at this text and it says, now I'm interested in almost anything that has a wheelchair in it. Ooh, I want to go like this. I should bring this down here. Sorry, guys. Didn't mean to interrupt. No, I'm interested in almost anything that has a wheelchair in it. Duh. I even like the Jerry Lewis telethon. Turns out Stephen Hawking has something called ALS, and he can't walk or talk, and he's probably the smartest man in the world, and everybody knows it. That is so cool. I bet he gets really frustrated sometimes. After the show went off, I got real quiet. He's like you, sort of, isn't he? Mrs. V asked. I pointed to yes on my board, then pointed to no. I don't follow you, she scratched her head. I pointed to need on my board, then to read. Need, read, need, read. What are the words that are important on this page? Well, I see that she is not talking about watching somebody that is smart. And she thinks that, and she understands that he gets really frustrated sometimes. And she got real quiet. But then she was asked a question, and then she said, I pointed to yes on my board, then pointed to no. Then she pointed to need, read, need, read. What does that tell us about her? What does that tell us? Is she somebody that is lazy? No, that doesn't make me think of lazy. Is that somebody that is skeptical or gentle or weak or dainty, insecure? No. She is somebody that is trying to figure out her place in the world. She is somebody that is, I would say, and I'm underlining today's words in red so that we can keep track of what we have talked about. Somebody that is, where's a good word over here? Let's see. Extravagant, daring, adventurous, curious. Look, I'm looking at all these words I know. Curious. Is she a curious person? She does say that she is interested in anything that has to do with a wheelchair in it. That means she's curious about it. Duh. And why does she say duh? Because she's in a wheelchair too, right? And turns out that Stephen Hawking has something called ALS, blah, 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 blah. So she is curious. And she is I'm trying to find a word here from our list that I could use, but I'm not seeing anything. Oh, what about honest? She's honest because, and this is me using inference, guys. She's honest because she knows she needs to read. She pointed to yes, pointed to no. She said yes, no, need read, need read. She gets frustrated. So she's an honest person. She's honest about wanting to learn. She's honest about her disability. And then we've got another text here. And once again, I'm going to look for, maybe I'm going to even look for her thoughts. And it says, it must have been about 90 degrees outside. We were sitting on her porch, watching the storm clouds gather. She told me the names of all the clouds and made up stories about them. I knew that later she'd have the names of every kind of cloud on words for me. Now, this is an interesting excerpt, or an interesting paragraph to me, because it really, to me, is more about Mrs. V, and it kind of talks about her and what she's capable of. And I think we'll even examine that in tomorrow's lesson. But today, what does this tell us about the main character of this story? It must have been about 90 degrees outside. We were sitting on her porch, watching the storm clouds gather. She told me the names of all the clouds and made up stories. I knew that she'd have names of every kind of cloud on word cards for me. What does that tell me about the main character? What does she think about Mrs. V? Well, I think that means that she is friendly, because she is sitting there hanging out with her teacher like that. Okay? And then I knew she'd have it, and she knows I knew that she'd later have the names on every kind of cloud on word cards for me. What does that tell you about how she thinks about her teacher? She's respectful, right? She's sentimental. She's respectful of her teacher. Because we're more than just one character trait. We're a handful of traits made up in this. Because she can be studious and intelligent and playful and funny. But she can also be curious and respectful and honest and friendly. So we're more than just one or two character traits. We have a whole bunch of traits made up in us. And it's defined by how a character may think, or the things they say, the words they say. You know, she told me the names of the clouds. I knew she'd have the names of every. So I almost get a sense of love here. She's a very loving person, because she loves what her teacher does for her, and she knows what to expect from her. Okay?